Hi, and welcome to another Generation Wisdom video. Today we're going to focus on one of Alex's favorite short story writers and poets, the American writer Edgar Allan Poe, from the early 19th century. Most people know him from the poem The Raven, and also the short story The Pit and the Pendulum. But today Alex has chosen a poem called Alone. So, Alex, take it away.
From childhood's hour I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I cannot bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I cannot awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill, the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view.
All right, so, where do you think we begin with this one?
So, I guess we can do it section by section, right?
Sure.
So, let's start with the first stanza. From childhood's hour I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I cannot bring my passions from a common spring. So, what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, this is a poem that's autobiographical. He's talking about himself, and he's older. He is thinking back to his childhood, and he is just basically saying that he feels that he is very different from everyone else. He doesn't see things the way other people see them. He doesn't have common experiences, or the things that stimulate, let's say, happiness or sadness in him aren't the same as what stimulates most people. So I think he feels he is a very different person. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it necessarily is about him per se. It could, but I think, it could refer to anyone who feels that they're alone. But I think really what this reminds me of is that I think it deals with the main theme of the idea that we're all basically alone to a certain degree in what we love. And to a certain degree, being mature and being secure means being okay with that. Because, for example, when we're okay with that and we know how to be alone with what we truly desire, that can give us the ability to be present with other people. And so, because, we live in a society now where everyone is conforming to other people's desires or being afraid of the same things. But sometimes when we can get in touch with our not loneliness, but even like solitude, that could be a source of power.
Yeah, I agree. Even though I think it may be autobiographical, it's also, there's good message for people here to think if you think you're alone, guess what? You're not alone. Poe felt like he was alone, and we all, at one point in our lives, especially in childhood, feel that we are different from everyone else and feel that loneliness. So move on to the next one.
Yeah, sure.
So the next section is, from the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Man, this guy is wallowing in loneliness. Unfortunately, it makes me feel bad for him when I read this poem. But looking at the first two sections, I think what I was saying about he doesn't see things the way other people see them. Now he also uses the word tone. My heart to joy at the same tone, which now means to me that. This is how you experience passion and you process the world. You see and you hear. That word tone speaks to me that not only does he not appreciate the things that most people see and bring them joy, it extends to what he hears. So he may not hear, we may hear the beautiful sounds of chirping birds. Maybe he doesn't think that's beautiful at all. So this poor Poe, in my estimation, he doesn't hear things the way people hear them either. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the idea that it includes all the senses. I kind of return back to the last line, and all I loved alone. It just came to me that, and it's not just that, as I said before, that what we love alone, but when we're in the act of loving something, even when we're in the vicinity of other people, there comes this point where we are almost alone with what we find to be beautiful. So if for example, say you're in a museum and you're gazing intently at all the canvases, but then one canvas like strikes you and it like causes like an aesthetic arrest, I guess you can say. You feel like completely captivated. You're not aware of the crowd that's around you, and suddenly you feel that you're alone with the painting. I feel like we all get in situations like this, and in situations like this which end up like having a huge impact on our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next stanza. Then in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean the third line, from every depth of good and ill, because I think that the poem overall like gives the impression that it's kind of pessimistic, kind of lonely and stuff like that, but the fact that something amazing happened in this protagonist's childhood, that it emerged from every depth of good and ill, kind of gives a hint towards not only where it comes from, but what it is, like not to automatically say that, how do I put this? And it gives a sense of hope, because if it comes from both good and ill, that would imply that it comes from something where there's a reconciliation of good and bad. So, it kind of gives a hint towards unity and not necessarily disunity or ill. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the one sort of like bright spot, inspirational spot in the poem where he says, it wasn't all bad. My life was drawn not just from the bad things that happened to me or the bad things that I experienced, but the good as well. And that last line of the section, the mystery which blinds me still, is so provocative. At this point, as you're reading the poem for the first time, you say to yourself, well, what mystery is he speaking of? And it really captivates you, that line. And I won't tell you what I think it is until we get to the end. So whose turn is it? Mine?
Yes.
Okay, so moving on. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold. Again, like just as in the first section, he was bringing all the senses, now he seems to bring in various forces and elements of the earth. So he mentions water, he mentions the mountain, earth, he mentions, fire, the sun. So this is extremely interesting. And I think they're somewhat metaphors for his experiences and his emotions, what he's gone through and how he's reacted to them. Both, he paints a terrifying picture, using that word torrent. That's not a word you hear very often. I had to look it up, to be honest with you. It means like rushing water, like of a raging river type of a thing. And then he juxtaposes it and says, well, or a fountain, which is something very gentle and beautiful. Again, in that previous paragraph where he says of good and ill. And so it's a great poetic, earthly description of what he, I think, has been through in his life. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely mysterious because it includes like a lot of opposites, It includes something that is beautiful, like a mountain or, say, a red cliff, but then it has something like a torrent, something that's very chaotic, can cause death, can cause drowning, etc. And I find what was really interesting at the end, the last line, in its autumn tint of gold, I found very interesting because, autumn implies, death of the birth that is summer. And so, the coming of winter. And so, it implies as if time, or at least just the sun, if you want to use the sun as a physical sun, or the sun as a symbol for truth or reality, that somehow he feels as if truth or reality was, diminuting. It was becoming less, or it was dying because of, autumn. And so, that could be one implication behind the line, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I took it, that is interesting. I took it a couple of ways. One, I thought, is this just a poetic way of saying, as the years went by, like the average non-poet would say, and I went through this for many years, as opposed to saying, every time I move around the sun or the sun rolls around me, well, there goes another day or there goes another year. So that's a whole nother interpretation of that line. Also, what I find eerie, and this has really, he had no way of knowing. He wrote this poem when he was around 20 years old. He died when he was 40. That's what I read today. He had no idea at the time of this writing that he indeed was in the autumn of his life.
That's true.
Which is, I find very eerie. Again, he didn't know it, but it's just eerie to think about. So let's move on to the finale.
So, from the lightning in the sky, as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm, and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. Yeah, I'm really attached to the word demon because, Edgar Allan Poe, from what I've read in his biography, he knew a lot about mystical ideas in different religions. He was into spiritualism, which was like a 19th century obsession with like the cross between spirituality and science. And if you know anything about his famous prose poem, Eureka, that's a great example of, him being obviously being interested in that subject. And the reason why I bring this up is because I don't think that he's using the word demon in his traditional, say, monotheistic sense of, one of the children or creatures of Satan. But, demon has like a really long history. If any of you guys know the philosopher Socrates in the original Greek says that he has a daemon who guides him. And the example is when Socrates is about to be trialed, he says, I have someone who guides me to do right and to avoid the wrong. And this daemon is where we get the word demon, but the original translation of it means that a guide, or like your conscience. And this has a history in Islamic thought and Christian thought as well for what this means. The Romans called it genius or genie, once genius as we call it today. And so I bring all this up because I think Poe is using that word demon in that kind of sense, of a sense of a guide, not necessarily as something that is tempting him to do towards evil. And then, I think this would make sense because if it were to, as we go back to the other earlier stanza about, coming from both good and ill, this would imply that, it could be demonic in the sense that it seems to come from ill. It seems to be something that is disastrous that we shouldn't be paying attention to. But the implication that it also comes from good, which means the demon is there to teach us something or to warn us about something. At least that's one possible idea. How do you feel about that, Dad?
I think that's amazing. I never thought about any of that, so I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, to me, this is where he answers the mystery. I mentioned earlier that a few sections earlier, he says, the mystery which blinds me still. What is that mystery? I think this is where he's trying to tell us what the mystery is. And of course, this final section is all about a terrifying storm. I'm assuming, the analogy is the storm of his life, when it's not going well, the things that haven't gone well for him in the past. But, life has its ups and downs, right? I mean, it never stays good for long, and it sinks back down, it's not so good, and then, but, it comes back up. So here's this terrifically horrible storm that lifts, it dies out, and even though skies are blue, he still sees a demon in his view. I think he's really asking, I think the mystery is why am I like this? Like, why am I different? Why do I not experience the world as everyone else does? And why is life like that? Like, why, even though when my life is good, do I see some bad? So I like that we've got like varying, interpretations, and I think they're both right. I think that's the thing to love about poetry is that everyone sees it a different way, kind of like Edgar Allan Poe. Definitely. He doesn't see everything the same, and I think that's part of it. So,
yeah, it's true. Definitely agree. Multiple interpretations. I think that's what makes poetry interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, that was great.
So we definitely want to hear what you think. Alex and I had some varying viewpoints on this, and please go to the comments and let us know what you think.
Thank you. Nice day.
Yeah, thank you.